The oak trees lining Willow Creek Road had seen 5 decades of Nina Harmon's life unfold. 52 years in the same 2-story colonial, where she and Robert had raised their daughter, celebrated anniversaries, and grown old together. Or at least, that's what Nina thought they were doing. The manila envelope sat on her kitchen table like an unexploded bomb. 4 months after Robert's funeral, Nina's fingers still trembled as she slid the letter opener along the seal. Inside was a document that would obliterate what remained of her world. I, Robert Edward Harmon, being of sound mind and body, do hereby revoke all previous wills and testaments. Nina's vision blurred as she read further. The words seemed to vibrate on the page, refusing to form coherent sentences in her mind. But the essential truth was undeniable. This will, dated just 6 weeks before Robert's sudden heart attack, left everything, their home, investments, even family heirlooms, to someone named Vanessa Mills. Not to their daughter Claire, not to Nina herself, to a complete stranger, a caretaker, the document called her. A caretaker Nina had never met, never even heard mentioned in their 47 years of marriage. The room seemed to tilt sideways. Nina clutched the edge of the table, her wedding ring catching the afternoon light that streamed through windows Robert had installed himself decades ago. How could a single piece of paper erase everything she thought she knew about her life, about her husband? "Mrs. Harmon, are you still there?" The voice on the phone belonged to Martin Delacroix, the estate attorney who had sent the envelope. Nina had called him immediately, certain there was some mistake. "Yes," she managed, her voice distant even to her own ears. "I'm trying to understand. This can't be right. Robert and I had a will. We made it together 15 years ago. Everything was supposed to go to Claire, with me as the executor." "I understand your confusion," Martin replied, his tone professionally sympathetic but detached. "The will you're referencing was indeed on file with your previous attorney. However, Mr. Harmon came to our firm 6 weeks before his passing and executed this new document, which legally supersedes all previous wills. But he never said anything, not a word about changing our plans." Nina's free hand found the gold locket around her neck, the one containing a photo of Robert on their wedding day. "And who is this woman? This Vanessa?" A pause on the line. "I'm not at liberty to discuss Ms. Mills' relationship with your husband beyond what's stated in the will. The document identifies her as his caretaker during his final months." "Caretaker? Robert wasn't ill. He had a heart attack. It was sudden. He never needed care." Nina's voice rose with each word, the shock giving way to indignation. "Mrs. Harmon, I suggest you seek independent legal counsel. These matters can be complicated. If you'd like a referral..." Nina hung up the phone. The silence of the house, Robert's absence, had never felt so absolute. She glanced at the collection of family photos lining the wall. Robert holding newborn Claire at the hospital. Their 25th anniversary cruise. Claire's college graduation. A stranger couldn't possibly have meant more to Robert than the life they'd built together. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. Nina's hands trembled as she dialed Claire's number, a call that had become increasingly rare over the past decade. The chasm between them had grown wider with each passing year, a series of small disagreements calcifying into a strained formality that broke Nina's heart. "Mom?" Claire answered on the 4th ring, surprise evident in her voice. "Is everything okay?" "No, honey, it's not." The words caught in Nina's throat. "I need you to come home. It's about your father's will." Claire Harmon Wexler hadn't set foot in her childhood home since the funeral 4 months ago. Even then, she'd stayed at a hotel, claiming it would be easier with the kids. But Nina knew the truth. Oak Ridge held too many unresolved tensions, too many arguments frozen in time. Now Claire stood in the kitchen doorway, a successful corporate attorney, who somehow looked like a hesitant teenager in this space. At 45, she had Robert's confident posture and Nina's skeptical eyes. Those eyes were now fixed on the papers spread across the kitchen table. "This makes no sense," Claire said, scanning the document for the third time. "Dad would never do this. Never." Nina watched her daughter with a mixture of relief and sorrow. Relief that Claire didn't question the wrongness of it all. Sorrow that it took something this terrible to bring them to the same side again. "The attorney said it's legal, that Robert signed it willingly." Claire's legal training took over. "We can contest this. Undue influence, lack of testamentary capacity. There are options." She looked up at her mother, a hint of dark humor crossing her face. Though knowing Dad, he probably researched every angle before making a move. Remember how he wouldn't even buy a toaster without reading 3 months of Consumer Reports? Despite everything, Nina felt a small smile form. 6 months for the riding mower, and then he still went with the one the neighbor recommended. The brief shared memory hung between them, a moment of connection in the storm. Robert's methodical nature, both endearing and maddening, something they'd both teased him about for years. Claire pulled out her phone, fingers flying across the screen. "I'm calling Eleanor Webb. She's the best estate litigator in the state." As Claire stepped into the living room to make the call, Nina's mind drifted back. The past 6 months before Robert's death replayed in her memory with new scrutiny. His increased absences, the vague explanations about running errands or meeting an old friend. Nina had attributed it to retirement restlessness. Now, each memory took on a sinister cast. Had he been seeing this woman? Planning his betrayal while kissing Nina goodnight? The thought made her physically ill. "Eleanor can meet us tomorrow morning," Claire announced, returning to the kitchen. "She says we have grounds to challenge, especially given the timing and circumstances." Nina nodded absently, still lost in recalculation of her marriage. "Mom," Claire said softly, placing a hand over Nina's weathered one. "Did you notice anything different about Dad before he died? Anything at all?" Nina wanted to say no, to preserve some version of her marriage that wasn't tainted. But the truth demanded release. "He was distant, distracted. I thought it was just age or boredom. We'd been married so long." She swallowed hard. "The last few months he took longer drives alone, said he needed time to think." Claire's expression hardened. Time to plan his escape, more likely. "Don't," Nina whispered. "Whatever has happened, he was still your father. A father who just disinherited me in favor of some caretaker." Claire's voice cracked on the word. "What does that even mean? Dad wasn't sick." Nina closed her eyes, remembering. His doctor did say his blood pressure was concerning at his last checkup, but he never mentioned hiring help. A heavy silence filled the room, both women lost in their private recalibrations of a man they thought they knew completely. "We should try to find her," Claire finally said. "This Vanessa person. I want to know exactly what she did to manipulate him." Nina felt a chill at the thought of meeting the woman who had somehow meant enough to Robert to upend his entire family legacy. But she nodded. Some truths, no matter how painful, needed facing. Eleanor Webb's office exuded the kind of understated wealth that inspired confidence. Dark mahogany shelves lined with leather-bound law books. A desk that had probably witnessed thousands of family crises just like theirs. Eleanor herself was not what Nina expected. In her mid-60s, with a sharp silver bob and penetrating eyes behind fashionable glasses, she radiated competence without coldness. "The good news," Eleanor said after reviewing the documents, "is that there are several avenues we can explore to contest this will. The bad news is that none of them are guaranteed, and all of them will be public, potentially messy, and definitely expensive." Claire leaned forward. Cost isn't an issue. We need to fix this. Eleanor nodded. First, let's understand what we're dealing with. This new will completely revokes the previous one. It leaves the house, all financial accounts, and personal property to Vanessa Mills, described as my dedicated caretaker and trusted companion. Mrs. Harmon is granted a life estate in the home, meaning she can live there until her death, but ownership transfers to Ms. Mills. Nina felt the room spin slightly. So, I'm living in a house that belongs to the woman who... She couldn't finish the sentence. Essentially, yes, Eleanor confirmed gently. There's also a personal letter referenced in the will to be delivered to Ms. Mills along with notification of inheritance. That suggests a significant personal relationship. Claire's jaw tightened. What grounds do we have to challenge? Several possibilities. Undue influence is the most obvious. The idea that Ms. Mills somehow manipulated your father into making these changes. Lack of testamentary capacity is another option, though more difficult to prove without evidence of cognitive impairment. Nina thought of Robert in those final months. Distracted, yes, but sharp as ever. He'd completed the New York Times crossword the morning before his heart attack. There's something else we should discuss, Eleanor continued. The timing of this new will, just 6 weeks before an unexpected death, raises questions. Did your husband have any reason to believe his health was failing? The question struck Nina like a physical blow. Had Robert known he was dying? Had he kept that from her too? His doctor had concerns about his heart, she admitted, but nothing immediate, nothing that would explain. She gestured helplessly at the documents. Eleanor made a note. We should request his medical records. If he had received a terminal diagnosis, it might help explain the sudden change, though not excuse the total exclusion of family. Claire's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, then back at Eleanor. I've had my assistant doing some digging. Vanessa Mills is 29 years old. She works, or worked, as a home health aide for Senior Comfort Services. 29. The number echoed in Nina's mind. 43 years younger than Robert, young enough to be his granddaughter. Eleanor's expression remained neutral. That confirms the caretaker relationship, at least nominally. The question becomes, why would your husband leave everything to a professional caretaker, especially one you never met, Mrs. Harmon? The implication hung in the air, unspoken but unmistakable. You think they were having an affair, Nina said flatly. Eleanor chose her words carefully. I think we need to consider all possibilities. People sometimes make dramatic changes to their estate plans when new attachments form late in life. My father wasn't that kind of man, Claire insisted, but doubt had already crept into her voice. Nina stared at her wedding ring. 47 years of marriage condensed into a single, terrible question. Had she ever really known Robert at all? The address they had for Vanessa Mills led to a modest apartment complex on the outskirts of town. Nina insisted on coming despite Claire's objections. She needed to see this woman, to understand what Robert had seen in her that was worth destroying his family for. They sat in Claire's rental car, watching the entrance. Nina felt ridiculous, like characters in the detective shows Robert used to enjoy. The thought brought an unexpected pang. Would she ever be able to remember anything about him without this new pain coloring it? That's her, Claire said suddenly, nodding toward a young woman approaching the building. Vanessa Mills was striking, though not in the way Nina had tortured herself imagining. No bombshell blonde or sophisticated temptress. Instead, she had a quiet, serious demeanor. Dark hair pulled back simply, dressed in practical clothes. She carried grocery bags in both hands and moved with purposeful efficiency. She looked so ordinary, Nina whispered. Stay here, Claire commanded, opening her car door. I'll handle this. No. Nina was already unbuckling her seatbelt. We do this together. They intercepted Vanessa at the building entrance. Up close, Nina could see the young woman's eyes, warm brown and startled as she recognized them from the funeral. Mrs. Harmon, Vanessa said, her voice soft with surprise. And Claire, I didn't expect to see you. I'm sure you didn't, Claire replied coldly. We need to talk about my father's will. Comprehension dawned on Vanessa's face. You received the notification. She glanced between them. Perhaps we should go inside. Nina couldn't reconcile this calm, composed young woman with the homewrecker she'd imagined. She followed numbly as Vanessa led them to her second-floor apartment, sparsely furnished, but immaculately clean. No photos of Robert visible, no obvious signs of ill-gotten wealth. Vanessa set down her groceries and faced them. I know this must be incredibly difficult for you both. Difficult? Claire laughed bitterly. Finding out my father left everything to a woman half his age, a woman my mother never even knew existed. Difficult doesn't begin to cover it. Vanessa didn't flinch. I understand your anger, but it's not what you think. Then explain it, Nina said, finding her voice at last. Explain why my husband of nearly 5 decades would do this. Vanessa hesitated, then gestured toward the small dining table. Please, sit down. This isn't a short story. Nina lowered herself into a chair, noticing for the first time how exhausted she felt. Claire remained standing, arms crossed defensively. I met Robert 9 months ago, Vanessa began. Not through my agency, at the hospital actually. I was visiting my mother. She was dying of pancreatic cancer. Robert was there for some tests. Nina remembered those tests. Routine, Robert had called them. Just a precaution after some chest pains. We talked in the waiting room, Vanessa continued. He was kind, asked about my mother. When he learned I was a caretaker, he seemed interested. Said he might need help soon, but didn't want to worry his family. Claire scoffed. How convenient. Vanessa met her gaze steadily. 2 weeks later, he called me. Said his doctor had found something concerning with his heart. Advanced coronary artery disease. He needed regular monitoring but didn't want to burden his wife. Nina felt the room tilt again. That's not possible. He never said anything about a serious diagnosis. He didn't want you to worry, Vanessa said gently. He told me you'd already lost so much. Your sister to cancer the year before, your best friend to Alzheimer's. He couldn't bear to watch you suffer through his decline too. The details were painfully accurate. Margaret's death had nearly broken Nina, and watching Patricia fade away had been its own special torture. He hired me privately, not through my agency, Vanessa continued. 3 times a week, I'd meet him at a coffee shop near his volunteer work at the library. Check his vitals, make sure he was taking his medications, adjust his care plan as needed. And somehow these medical checkups led to him leaving you everything he owned. Claire's voice dripped with skepticism. Vanessa reached for her phone. He made me promise not to show anyone this unless absolutely necessary. I think it's necessary now. She pulled up a video and placed the phone on the table. Robert's face filled the screen. Nina's breath caught at the sight of him, alive and speaking directly to the camera. If you're watching this, then the worst has happened sooner than my doctors predicted, he began. His voice, that familiar, gentle voice, filled the small apartment. And my family has discovered what I've done with my will. Nina couldn't tear her eyes from the screen, from the husband she'd buried 4 months ago. Nina, my love, I'm so sorry for the pain this must be causing you. The secrecy, the confusion. But please understand, I did this to protect you, not to hurt you. He shifted slightly, and Nina could see the strain in his face she'd attributed to normal aging. The doctors gave me a year, maybe less. The surgery they recommended had a 30% survival rate, and even then, quality of life would be compromised. I chose not to roll those dice. I chose to spend my remaining time living, not dying in hospital rooms. Claire had sunk into a chair, her legal persona cracking as her father continued. I knew that if I told you the truth, you'd insist on experimental treatments, second opinions, fighting to the bitter end. After watching what happened with Margaret, I couldn't put you through that again. So I decided to handle things my way. He sighed deeply. As for the will, Nina, everything was always meant to come back to you and Claire. Vanessa has instructions. She's not keeping anything. She's the executor of my true wishes, the ones I couldn't put on paper without raising questions. Nina glanced at Vanessa, who sat with downcast eyes. The house, the accounts, they're being held in trust until certain conditions are met. Conditions that would have been impossible if I'd made you the beneficiary, Nina. Because the nursing homes and medical establishments would claim everything for your care if you need it someday. Understanding dawned slowly. Robert had created a legal shield around their assets. Claire, Robert continued, his voice softening, your anger was always your protection against pain. I know you'll be furious with me. You have every right to be. But remember what you learned in your first year of law school. Sometimes the letter of the law and true justice aren't the same thing. Tears streamed down Claire's face now, her anger momentarily suspended. Vanessa has agreed to be the legal owner on paper, but has signed separate documents legally binding her to use everything for your mother's care, and then to transfer all remaining assets to you afterward. The arrangement protects our family's assets from being consumed by long-term care costs, while ensuring you both are provided for. Robert leaned closer to the camera. I've known for decades that our healthcare system punishes those who save responsibly. This was my solution. Technically legal, if morally ambiguous. Rather fitting for my final act, don't you think? The ghost of his familiar wry smile appeared. Nina, my love for you never wavered. Not for a moment in 47 years. Vanessa was my caretaker, my confidant in illness, and now the guardian of my final wishes. Nothing more. The video ended. Silence filled the apartment. Vanessa quietly stood and retrieved a folder from a drawer. These are the secondary legal documents, the trust agreement, the transfer instructions. Everything Robert set up with a different attorney, one who specializes in elder law and asset protection. Nina took the folder with numb fingers. Inside were dozens of pages of legal documents, all bearing Robert's familiar signature. Why the secrecy? Claire asked, her voice hoarse. Why not just tell us? Because what he did exists in a legal gray area, Vanessa explained. If either of you had known beforehand, it could have invalidated the arrangement. And because he didn't want your mother to share the burden of his illness. Nina thought of those final months, Robert's increased absences, his distraction. Not betrayal, but protection. Misguided, perhaps, but born of love. I never wanted this role, Vanessa added softly. But he was persuasive. Said he had no one else he could trust with this who wasn't emotionally involved. Claire, ever the attorney, was already scanning the documents. These appear legitimate, but we'll need our lawyer to verify everything. Nina barely heard them. She was lost in the revelation that Robert had been dying, had known he was dying, and had borne that knowledge alone rather than share the burden. He suffered alone, she whispered. All those months, in pain, afraid, and I never knew. Vanessa touched her arm gently. He wasn't alone, Mrs. Harmon, and he wasn't afraid. He was at peace with his decision. She hesitated, then added, "I didn't want to take this role at first. I thought he was being paranoid, maybe even overly dramatic about the potential costs. I told him to just talk to you both." She shook her head. "I was wrong. The more I learned about how the system works, the more I understood his fears." Nina looked up at the young woman, no longer a mythical homewrecker, but a reluctant confidant thrust into their family drama. "Call me Nina," she said softly. 6 weeks later, Nina sat in Eleanor Webb's office again, this time with Vanessa beside her. Claire participated via video call from her office in Chicago. "The revised documents are ready for signature," Eleanor explained. "This arrangement maintains the asset protection structure Robert created while simplifying the execution. Vanessa will remain the technical owner of the property and accounts, but with clear fiduciary responsibility to use them exclusively for Nina's benefit during her lifetime." Vanessa nodded. "And upon Nina's passing, everything transfers directly to Claire, with modest compensation to me for serving as trustee as Robert specified." Nina felt a complex mix of emotions. The practical attorney part of her mind, the part that had worked alongside Robert in their financial planning for decades, recognized the elegant solution her husband had engineered. The wife in her still ached with the knowledge of his secret suffering. "I still don't understand why he didn't include me in this decision," Nina said, more to herself than anyone else. Eleanor, with her decades of experience in family estate matters, offered the perspective Nina had been seeking. "In my practice, I've seen this pattern many times, particularly with men of Robert's generation. They believe protecting their loved ones means shielding them from difficult truths. It's misguided, perhaps, but comes from a place of deep love." She closed the folder containing the revised documents. "Robert created an unorthodox but effective strategy to protect your financial legacy from being consumed by potential healthcare costs. The average nursing home stay costs over $100,000 per year, and Medicare covers very little of it. Many families see their life savings evaporate in months. By placing assets with a third party through this arrangement, he ensured that if you need long-term care, Nina, you can qualify for assistance without impoverishing yourself or Claire. It's a strategy that exists because our system forces impossible choices on aging Americans." Nina thought of her friends who had lost everything to medical expenses in their final years. How Robert had witnessed their struggles. How determined he'd always been that they would never face the same fate. "He made the best decision he could with the information he had," Eleanor concluded. "Not perfect, but motivated by love and protection." As they left the office, the weight that had crushed Nina since receiving that manila envelope had shifted. Not disappeared, the pain of Robert's secrecy would linger, but transformed into something she could carry. Outside in the bright afternoon sunshine, Vanessa turned to her. "I've been thinking about finding another client near my mother's nursing home, moving closer to her." Nina studied the young woman who had become an unexpected bridge to her husband's final thoughts. "The house has 4 bedrooms, and I rattle around in it alone. The garden apartment has its own entrance. It was meant for Claire, but she never wanted to move back." Surprise registered on Vanessa's face. "Are you suggesting—" "Robert trusted you," Nina said simply. "That means something to me, and I could use the company." Vanessa shook her head. "I couldn't possibly. After everything that's happened, it wouldn't be right." "Think about it," Nina said. "The offer stands." As they walked to their cars, Vanessa paused. "You know, your husband talked about you constantly, the way your eyes crinkle when you laugh, how you always keep fresh flowers in the kitchen, even in winter." She smiled faintly. "I feel like I know you, in a way. Maybe that's why this is all so—" "Complicated?" Nina offered. "Yes, complicated." Vanessa glanced back at Eleanor's office building. "I'll think about your offer. Carefully." It wasn't forgiveness, exactly, nor complete understanding, but it was a step towards something new, an acknowledgement that life rarely gives us clean narratives or perfect endings. Later that evening, Nina sat on the porch swing Robert had built when Claire was just a child. In her hands was a letter she'd found in his desk drawer, addressed to her, but never delivered. His explanation, his apology, his love poured onto the page in his distinctive handwriting. "I chose time over truth," he had written. "More moments of joy with you, unmarred by the shadow of what was coming. Selfish, perhaps. But given the chance to do it again, I would make the same choice. Every sunrise with you, seeing your smile undiminished by worry over me, was worth any price." His handwriting seemed to falter on the next lines. "If I have one regret, it's not trusting you enough to carry this burden with me. I protected you from my illness, but I see now that protecting you didn't mean hiding from you. Some weights are meant to be shared, even when they're heavy, especially then." Nina watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks over the neighborhood they had called home for 5 decades. Tomorrow, Claire would visit, the first of monthly visits they had agreed to, a slow rebuilding of their relationship. Claire had mentioned on their last call that she was researching ways to formalize Robert's protective intentions, perhaps establishing a proper family trust, or even starting a small legal initiative to help other families navigate these treacherous waters. Dad was right about the problem, she'd said, even if his solution was unconventional. I can use my skills to build something better. Life after betrayal, even betrayal born of misguided love, wasn't simple. The path forward wasn't clear, but there was a path. As Nina rocked gently in the evening breeze, she realized something profound about Robert's choice. His protection without communication had created the very pain he'd tried to prevent. All those months of secrecy, the shock of discovery after he was gone, perhaps the most valuable thing they could have shared wasn't the money or property, but honest conversations about his fears and intentions. She thought about the countless other families facing these same impossible choices, how the crushing weight of potential care costs forces good people into desperate decisions. How Robert, always the planner, had seen the threat to everything they'd built together and acted in the only way he knew how, by trying to carry the burden alone. Nina traced her finger over his handwriting, the familiar loops and curves of a hand she would never hold again. In the end, she realized, our true legacy isn't just what we leave behind. It's how we leave it, and the stories our loved ones tell about us when we're gone. The story Nina would tell now had changed. Not the fairy tale she once believed, nor the nightmare of betrayal she had briefly feared, but something more complex and true. A love story with chapters of miscommunication, of good intentions gone awry, but a love story nonetheless. The light faded from the sky as Nina folded the letter and held it close to her heart. Perhaps by sharing this journey, the pain, the revelations, the reconciliation, others might find their way through similar shadows. Perhaps that was the final gift she could give, both to Robert's memory and to a world where so many families face these same silent struggles. If you've faced similar family conflicts or struggled with impossible healthcare decisions, your story matters. Share your experience in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to Goldprint for more real-life stories exploring the complex intersection of family, finance, and the choices that shape our final years. Because we're all in this together, trying to protect what matters most, while we still have time to say what needs to be said.